The sun was beginning to dip behind the Montana hills, staining the sky with streaks of orange and crimson. A warm breeze danced through the tall wheat fields that surrounded the farmhouse, whispering secrets to the land as if trying to preserve the peace a little longer. On the porch, a woman stood with her hand wrapped around a chipped mug, steam curling into the cooling air. Her name was Sarah Collins, and to anyone passing by, she was simply a single mother trying to raise a child on her own. But there was more to her than met the eye. She wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt, her brown hair pulled back in a loose braid. Her eyes, a deep hazel, scanned the horizon with a quiet intensity that didn't quite match the softness of her outward life. Each movement was careful, deliberate, like someone who had spent years learning to control the rhythm of her breath. Her stillness wasn't laziness, it was awareness. From inside the house came the soft giggle of her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, followed by the clatter of crayons spilling to the wooden floor. Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. That sound, Lily's laughter, was what kept her grounded, what reminded her that peace, however fragile, was worth protecting. Yet that evening, as the last of the sun disappeared and the shadows stretched across the ground, something shifted in the wind. Sarah felt it before she saw anything, a tightening in her chest, a whisper in the back of her mind that something wasn't right. She set the mug down slowly and stepped off the porch. The air was too quiet. 100 feet from the house, beside the barn, she saw it. A fresh tire mark in the dirt. The tracks were wide, deep. Heavy-duty off-road. Not hers. And certainly not from the occasional neighbors who drove by every couple of weeks. She crouched beside them, brushing the dirt with her fingers. Still warm. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Lily peeked out, a crayon still in her hand. "Mom? What are you doing?" Sarah stood and smiled gently. "Just checking something, sweetheart. Go back inside and finish your drawing, okay? Is it another fox?" Lily asked, half curious, half hopeful. Sarah nodded, lying with ease. "Maybe. I'll be in soon." When the door closed behind her daughter, the smile vanished from Sarah's face. She turned toward the barn. Something shiny caught her eye, a nail driven into the wood just beneath the old horseshoe, a piece of paper fluttering from it. She walked slowly, almost cautiously, like the barn might explode. The note was scribbled in thick black marker on torn cardboard. "This land ain't yours. Leave before it gets ugly. Asterisk asterisk. No name. No signature. Just a threat with the weight of experience behind it." Sarah didn't flinch. Not immediately. She folded the note and slid it into her back pocket. There was no panic in her movements, only the practiced calm of someone who had dealt with worse. She looked around once more, her eyes narrowing, scanning the tree line beyond the wheat. Nothing moved, but she felt it. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep curled up with her sketchbook, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table. The old light bulb above flickered now and then, adding a ghostly rhythm to the silence. Her fingers drummed against the wood as she stared at the note. It had been years since she had last felt this kind of threat up close. Years since the military had released her with a medal in one hand and silence in the other. A sniper for the U.S. Army's most elite unit, Sarah had spent nearly a decade seeing threats before anyone else could. Taking them out before they even knew they'd been seen. She had been called a ghost, a phantom, an invisible protector of those who never even knew her name. But she hadn't fired a weapon in over 6 years. She had buried that life when Lily was born, hoping she could replace the violence with family, bloodshed with love. But now it seemed the world she'd once walked away from was finding its way back. And it wasn't after her medals. It was after her land, her child, her peace. The local sheriff wouldn't do much. He hadn't the last time she mentioned the strange car parked down the hill. Probably just some hunters, he'd shrugged. They don't mean any harm. But Sarah knew better. People who don't mean harm don't leave threats in the dark. She got up and moved quietly to the coat closet, opening the creaky door with care. Behind old coats and dusty boots sat a wooden case. She hesitated only for a second before pulling it out. With slow reverence, she opened it. Inside lay her M24 sniper rifle, wrapped in oiled cloth, along with a faded photo of her unit. Her fingers hovered over it, then withdrew. She closed the box again without touching the weapon. Not yet. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the porch swing. A barn owl screeched in the distance. Sarah stood at the window, arms crossed, her eyes tracing the horizon once more. This time she saw headlights, brief, faint, then gone. But it was enough. She turned away from the window, locked all the doors, then slipped into Lily's room. The child was fast asleep, hugging a stuffed rabbit, cheeks pink and peaceful. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "I won't let them near you," she whispered. "No matter who they are." She kissed Lily's temple and stood, her body quiet but her mind now in motion. Old instincts had begun to reawaken. She could feel the muscle memory returning, step by step, breath by breath. Something was coming. And Sarah Collins wasn't just a mother. She had been trained for war. Morning came with a harsh chill that clung to the air longer than it should have in late spring. Sarah stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, her movements automatic, but her mind was far from the kitchen. The windows had remained locked through the night, and the barn light stayed on until dawn. Nothing else had happened yet. But the silence was not comfort. It was tension, coiled like wire, waiting for release. Lily sat at the table, kicking her legs and humming softly, coloring in the same drawing she'd started the day before, a horse in a meadow. She hadn't noticed the shadows under her mother's eyes, or the fact that Sarah's gaze lingered too long out the window between each turn of the pancake. "Are you gonna come to the school thing next week?" Lily asked between bites. Sarah nodded, but her voice was distant. "Of course I will." She always said yes, though she often made sure to stay near the exits. Crowds weren't her thing. They hadn't been since Kandahar. After breakfast, Sarah walked the perimeter of the property, moving with the trained precision of someone who'd once lived under the constant threat of being watched. She examined the tire tracks again. No new ones, but that didn't comfort her. The note hadn't been a prank. It was a test. And they were waiting to see what she would do. She checked the gates, fixed the latch on the back fence, and noted the disturbed soil near the well. Probably an animal, but she didn't take chances. Not anymore. Back inside, she unrolled the blueprint of the farmhouse she had drawn up when they first moved in, emergency routes, blind spots, and lines of sight from every window. She hadn't needed it in years. Now it looked like a plan for a fortress. Her fingers traced the drawing slowly, memories bleeding into her mind. Breathing through a scope in the dead heat of Afghanistan, her heartbeat sinking with the slow squeeze of the trigger. She'd taken lives in the name of freedom, of security. But she'd never imagined needing those skills again. Not here. Not with Lily sleeping just one room away. At the local market, whispers always followed her. Quiet type, they said. Bit of a loner. People respected her space but never tried to know her. That's how she liked it. But the problem with isolation was that when danger came, you were truly alone. That afternoon, Sarah drove into town. She needed to check in with the sheriff, even if she didn't expect much. Sheriff Dawes was a good man, but his badge carried more rust than authority these days. Budget cuts, disinterest, and small-town routine had dulled his edge. He looked up from behind a cluttered desk as Sarah entered. "Ms. Collins, everything all right out at your place? I found a threat on my barn," she said without preamble. "No name, just a message. And tire tracks. Big ones." Dawes sighed, adjusting his belt. "Probably some drunk ranch kids messing around. Not much else to do around here lately." Sarah stared at him, unmoved. This wasn't a joke. Whoever it was, they knew to come at night. They knew where to leave the message, so I'd find it. He leaned back, scratching his chin. "You want me to drive out, take a look?" "No," she said too quickly. Then softened her tone. "If something happens, I just want it on record." Dawes gave a slow nod. Fair enough. But if you're worried, maybe stay with someone for a few days. There's no one to stay with. The truth hung heavy between them. She had no family left. Friends were all from a life she'd buried. The only person in her world who mattered was Lily. Back on the farm, the wind picked up. Trees swayed like dancers caught in a trance, and the screen door creaked even though no one touched it. Sarah kept Lily close that night. They baked cookies, watched cartoons, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But every sound outside sent Sarah's eyes darting toward the shadows. After Lily was tucked into bed, Sarah opened the case again. She cleaned the rifle meticulously, her hands steady, her movements careful. She didn't want to use it. She prayed she wouldn't have to. But it needed to be ready. She placed it back under the floorboard, concealed beneath an old trunk. Her next stop was the barn. Inside, she reinforced the locks, checked the nails on the outer door, and lined the walls with hidden tools that could be used as defense. Old instincts returned like long-lost companions, unwelcome, but familiar. Just as she was leaving, her boot struck something near the hay pile. She crouched, brushed aside the straw, and found a crushed cigarette. Still fresh. She hadn't seen or smelled smoke earlier. Someone had been inside. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She stepped out slowly, eyes scanning the tree line, ears tuned to every sound. Then she locked the barn and returned to the house. Once inside, she quietly pushed a dresser in front of the back door. She placed a kitchen chair under the front doorknob. It wouldn't stop someone determined, but it would slow them down. She kept her phone fully charged and a flashlight by the bedside. Her boots stayed by the bed now, not in the closet. Before going to sleep, she checked on Lily again. The child was breathing deeply, arms wrapped around her rabbit, dreaming of ponies and castles. Sarah whispered, "Sleep tight, baby. I'm watching." She lay down fully clothed, heart awake even as her eyes closed. The farm was quiet again, but the silence was deceptive. She felt the pressure mounting, felt the lines stretching taut. It would snap soon. She didn't know who they were yet. She didn't know when they'd return. But she knew they would. And this time, she wouldn't be caught off guard. The storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked across the sky like artillery fire, echoing off the hills as fat raindrops splattered against the tin roof of the farmhouse. Sarah jolted upright in bed, instantly alert. Her hand reached for the flashlight on instinct, but it wasn't the storm that woke her. It was the sound beneath it. A soft, deliberate creak from the back porch. She moved like breath. Quiet, smooth, focused. In 2 steps, she was across the room, pulling her boots on without bothering to tie the laces. She eased Lily's door open, her heart aching at the sight of her daughter curled up beneath the quilt, undisturbed by the storm outside. Sarah slipped inside and gently placed the stuffed rabbit closer to her. Then, silently, she closed the door. Downstairs, the wind howled louder, but Sarah's ears were tuned to something else. Movement. Boots on wood. Another creak. Then a whisper. She moved to the kitchen and reached under the sink, pulling out the old revolver she'd stashed earlier in the week. Not her weapon of choice, but easier to handle indoors. The M24 stayed beneath the floorboards, for now. A loud bang shattered the air. The back door. Someone had tried to force it. The chair jammed under the knob held, for now, but not for long. Sarah moved quickly, cutting through the hallway and ducking under a window. A shadow passed by, then another. 3. Maybe 4. She breathed through her nose, controlling the thrum of adrenaline pounding in her veins. The men outside weren't professionals. They were sloppy, loud, confident in their numbers. That was their weakness. The door cracked louder. Splinters scattered across the floor. Sarah slid behind the living room wall, gun raised, her mind calculating every possible outcome. If they breached the kitchen, she'd have to draw them in, closer, then strike. Another slam. Then silence. She waited. Footsteps retreated briefly, then glass shattered. The side window. She pivoted, gun trained on the noise. A boot appeared, then a leg. The intruder was halfway through when she stepped into view. "Get out of my house," she said, calm and deadly. The man froze, eyes wide, rain dripping from his beard. She recognized him. Vince, or maybe Vance, one of the local drifters who worked the cattle yards and got too drunk to pay attention. His eyes darted toward the broken window behind him. "I said out." He lunged. The shot rang out, deafening in the tight space. His shoulder jerked back as he crashed through the table behind him. Groaning, he tried to get up, but she pressed the barrel of the gun to his temple. "Don't," she growled. He stilled. A yell outside, then chaos. More footsteps. More shouting. Sarah grabbed a pair of zip ties from her drawer, bound Vince's wrists, then dragged him into the pantry and locked the door. Not her preferred holding cell, but it would have to do. She dashed upstairs, heart racing. Lily was awake now, sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Mom," her voice trembled. Sarah knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face. "It's okay, baby. Everything's going to be fine. Remember what we practiced?" Lily nodded, tears in her eyes. "Hide in the crawl space. Stay quiet." Sarah kissed her forehead. "That's my girl. Go. Now." She helped Lily into the hidden space beneath the closet floorboards, a space Sarah had quietly built when they first moved in. Not because she expected this, but because somewhere deep down she'd always known. She replaced the board, covered it with a rug, and stood. Her hands shook for just a second. Then she locked the door behind her. Back downstairs, the front door exploded inward. Two figures entered, shouting to one another, guns raised. Sarah slid along the wall, slipping into the shadows. She counted their steps, watched their angles, and struck like lightning. The first man dropped with a grunt as she slammed a frying pan into his jaw, knocking him unconscious. The second turned, fired. A bullet grazed the wall inches from her head. She dove, rolled, and kicked the man's knee, dropping him to the ground. A swift blow to the temple with the revolvers but left him still. The house smelled of rain and gunpowder. Another voice called from outside, angry now. "Vince? You dead in there?" Sarah picked up one of the intruder's radios. "He's alive." "Barely," she said into it. "Tell the rest to leave, or the next one's going in the ground." A pause. Then laughter. "Lady, you've got no idea who you're dealing with." "I do," she said. "And that's why you should run." Static answered her. Sarah tossed the radio aside and finally went for the floorboards. The rifle was still there. Cold. Familiar. She loaded it with quiet efficiency, each click of the bolt snapping her back into her old skin. This was war now. A different kind, but no less dangerous. She stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung over her shoulder. The rain had lessened, but the wind howled like a warning. Across the field, she saw two figures emerging from behind the trees. One had a crowbar. The other carried a shotgun. She dropped to one knee, set the scope to the right distance, and exhaled. One shot. The crowbar dropped. The second man dove for cover, then ran, yelling as he vanished into the dark. Behind her, the wind whispered again. Inside, Lily was safe. For now. But Sarah knew it wasn't over. They would come back. And when they did, they'd bring more than threats and arrogance. They'd bring war. And she would be ready. The sun rose slow and heavy the next morning, casting a bruised light across the battered farmhouse. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, shattered glass lay in small, glinting piles, and muddy footprints marred the floorboards. Sarah stood in the doorway, rifle resting against her shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained, in her body, in the air, in the quiet that wasn't quite peaceful. Behind her, Lily slept on the couch, curled under a quilt, her breathing soft and even. She hadn't said much after Sarah brought her out of the crawl space. Just clung to her mother with tiny, shaking hands and buried her face in her chest. Sarah hadn't said much either. Words felt too small for the night they had survived. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later, summoned by the neighbor who'd heard gunshots echoing through the hills. Dawes stepped out of his cruiser, his face pale as he surveyed the damage. He removed his hat, exhaled deeply, and approached without speaking. His eyes landed on the pantry door, still blocked with a chair. "Open it," Sarah said, voice calm. He did. Inside, Vince sat, bruised, bleeding slightly from the shoulder, and very quiet. He didn't resist when Dawes cuffed him, didn't speak a word when led outside to the squad car. The other two men were already unconscious and zip-tied in the living room. The last had fled under Sarah's bullet, still alive, but likely scarred by the sudden reality of who he had tried to challenge. Dawes rubbed his temple and glanced at Sarah. "You want to tell me what the hell happened out here?" "I defended my home," she said simply. "I warned them. They came anyway." He looked at her, really looked this time. Not as the quiet woman who kept to herself or the single mother trying to stay invisible. He saw the soldier now, the steel beneath her silence, the precision in her violence, the discipline in her restraint. "Do you have any idea who they were working for?" he asked. She shook her head. "No names. No clear motive. Could be land, could be leverage. I don't know. But they knew how to move in the dark. Not just amateurs." Dawes nodded slowly. "We'll take it from here." "I doubt it," she said, not unkindly. "But I appreciate the effort." The sheriff gathered the men, called for backup, and left without further questions. Sarah stood alone on the porch again, watching the dust trail from his cruiser fade into the distance. She felt no triumph, no relief. Just fatigue, deep and ancient. She spent the rest of the day quietly rebuilding. Fixing the broken door with wood from the shed. Sweeping up the glass. Reinforcing the windows. Every motion was methodical. Every nail driven into place was an act of control, a way of reclaiming what the night had tried to take. That evening Lily helped. She held the hammer when Sarah's hands began to shake. She passed the broom when the dust grew thick. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed close. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Sarah finally sat down beside her daughter on the porch steps. The air was cooler now, scented with pine and distant rain. Crickets chirped, unaware of the battle that had raged hours earlier. "Are the bad men gone?" Lily asked quietly. "For now," Sarah answered. "But if they come back, we'll be ready." Lily nodded. "You're not scared of them?" Sarah looked at her. "I was scared. Terrified. But being scared doesn't mean you stop protecting what matters. Like me." Sarah wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close. "Especially you." They sat in silence for a long while. The kind of silence that follows a storm, not empty, but cleansing. Sarah felt something inside her shift. Not vanish, but soften. The hardened edge she'd carried since her service. The constant awareness, the readiness to strike. It would never fully leave her, but now it served something more. It wasn't just survival. It was guardianship. It was motherhood forged through fire. In the following days, rumors rippled through the town. People whispered about the night of the storm. About how 4 armed men attacked the Collins farm and walked away broken or not at all. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew who was behind the defense. Some began offering help. Wood for repairs. Meals delivered quietly to the porch. A spare generator from an old farmer up the hill. Sarah didn't refuse. For the first time in years, she allowed the community to come in. Not because she needed them, but because Lily needed to see the good in people too. At the school pickup, other parents greeted her with cautious admiration. Teachers lingered a little longer, smiling more warmly. No one asked what really happened. They didn't need to. They'd heard enough. A week later, Sarah stood at the edge of her field, watching Lily run barefoot through the tall grass, chasing butterflies. The rifle stayed locked away now, the revolver back under the sink. But she still checked the doors twice at night, still parked the truck facing outward, still kept an ear to the wind. Not out of fear, but vigilance. She was no longer hiding from her past. She was living alongside it, using it, teaching her daughter not just how to survive, but how to stand. The world hadn't changed. It never truly would. There would always be darkness, always those who tried to take more than they were owed. But now, Sarah knew this place, this life, was hers to defend. And she would defend it with everything she had. Because sometimes, heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes, they wear flannel shirts, carry groceries in one hand and rifles in the other. Sometimes, the strongest warrior is a mother with something to lose. And when the outlaws come again, if they do, they'll find more than a woman alone on a farm. They'll find the wrong soul to cross. And they'll never make that mistake again.